Before the arrival of Europeans on the American continent, around 15,000 to 20,000 years ago, there were already numerous cultures and civilizations. The first people to inhabit America were the indigenous peoples who likely crossed the Bering Strait from Asia. Over time, these peoples spread across the continent, creating diverse cultures, ranging from hunters and gatherers to agricultural civilizations. Some of the most well-known indigenous peoples were the Maya, Aztecs, and Incas. These civilizations had advanced architecture, astronomy, art, and writing systems. For example, the Incas built complex engineering systems, including roads and aqueducts, while the Aztecs created a vast empire in Mexico with a developed economy and religious traditions. European colonization. The first European expansion into the American continent began at the end of the 15th century with the voyages of Christopher Columbus. In 1492, he discovered new lands, though he did not realize they were part of a new continent. Over the following years, the Spanish, Portuguese, French, and English began arriving, each with their own goals, ranging from seeking gold and silk to establishing trading colonies and missions. The Spanish began colonizing South and Central America, creating a vast Spanish empire that stretched from present-day Florida to Patagonia. During this period, many indigenous peoples suffered from brutal exploitation, devastating epidemics, and forced conversions to Christianity. The French settled in Canada and parts of what is now the United States, particularly in the Mississippi River Valley, establishing important trade routes for fur trading. The English started their colonization on the eastern coast of North America. The first successful settlements were founded in 1607 in Jamestown, Virginia, and in 1620 in Plymouth, Massachusetts. Over time, the future United States developed 13 English colonies, where agriculture, particularly tobacco and rice farming, flourished, and social and political structures began to form. The War of Independence. By the mid-18th century, the American colonies had grown and developed their own economy. However, tensions were rising between the colonists and the British government, as the colonies began to feel economic and political restrictions from the mother country. This was reflected in taxes such as the 1773 Tea Act, which led to the famous Boston Tea Party incident. In 1775, when British troops tried to seize arms in Massachusetts, the American Revolutionary War began. The colonies united under the leadership of George Washington, and, with the support of France, they were able to win independence in 1783. The war ended with the signing of the Treaty of Paris. The formation of the United States. After gaining independence, the new states decided to form a unified federation. In 1787, the U.S. Constitution was adopted, laying the foundations for the federal government, including the system of checks and balances between the executive, legislative, and judicial branches. The Constitution granted citizens rights, but it still did not address critical issues like slavery and women's rights, which would become the subject of future struggles. The early years of the new country were filled with challenges. The country expanded southward through processes like the Louisiana Purchase in 1803 and conflicts with indigenous peoples and other nations, including the Anglo-American War of 1812. The Civil War and its aftermath. One of the most significant chapters in U.S. history was the Civil War of 1861 to 1865. The primary cause of the war was slavery, which existed in the southern states, where the economy relied on the labor of enslaved Africans, while the North was more industrialized and opposed slavery. The conflict began after Abraham Lincoln, elected president in 1860, opposed the spread of slavery to new territories. The southern states, where slavery was essential to the economy, declared their secession from the Union and formed the Confederate States of America. After 4 years of fighting, the United States won, slavery was abolished, and the nation remained unified. The Civil War also led to significant social changes. The 13th Amendment to the Constitution, passed after the war in 1865, abolished slavery, and the 14th and 15th Amendments granted civil rights to former slaves, including voting rights. National economic development and world politics. Throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the U.S. experienced significant economic growth, especially due to industrialization. Urbanization increased, new technologies like railroads and electricity emerged, and cities expanded. In 1898, the U.S. entered the Spanish-American War, which resulted in a victory and American control over Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Philippines, and Guam. The U.S. initially remained neutral during World War I but entered the conflict in 1917 after Germany began attacking American merchant ships. After the war, the U.S. emerged as one of the leading world powers, gaining influence in international politics. The Great Depression and World War II. The Great Depression of 1929 had catastrophic effects on the U.S. economy, leading to mass unemployment and poverty. However, President Franklin D. Roosevelt took decisive measures to restore the economy, including the New Deal program. During World War II, the U.S. became one of the major Allied powers, and after its victory in 1945, the country emerged as a global superpower, playing a central role in the creation of the United Nations and the beginning of the Cold War. The Cold War, Civil Rights, and Modern Times. After World War II, the U.S. entered the Cold War with the Soviet Union. This period was marked by global competition, nuclear arms races, and numerous conflicts in various regions, such as the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and the war in Afghanistan. Americans also experienced major social changes, particularly the struggle for African American civil rights and women's rights in the 1950s to 1970s. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, the U.S. continued to influence global politics. While facing new challenges, such as terrorism after the September 11, 2001 attacks, the U.S. maintained its leadership role on the world stage. Today, the United States is an economic, political, and cultural center that continues to influence global processes, scientific progress, technology, and culture.